Welcome back. My name is Andy, and you're listening to the Poor Pro's Almanac. Following up on our discussion around black walnuts and native tree crops the past few weeks, we're joined by the director of the University of Tennessee's Tree Improvement Program, Dr. Scott Schlarbaum. Most people listening are probably surprised that any university offers a tree improvement program, and they'd even be more surprised to know that the program isn't designed specifically with future cash crops in mind, but rather protecting ecotype genetic diversity and developing the foundation for potential tree crops such as acorns, black walnuts, butternuts, and more. Scott's a wealth of information, and I really enjoyed our talk, and I'm sure you will too. For more information about the University of Tennessee's Tree Improvement Program, check out the show's notes, and if you enjoy the episode, give us a review on iTunes. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about this program at the University of Tennessee that is really interesting. I think I'd love to see it kind of expanded at other schools. So tell us a little bit about it.
The University of Tennessee's Tree Improvement Program started back in 1959. And in that era, in the 50s and then early 60s, there were a number of tree improvement programs across the nation. The goal is, this is forestry, not horticultural tree, or necessarily landscape tree. At the time, there was, of course, more money available, from not only the federal government but also from state governments, and they started to show that you could actually genetically improve pines, and before that, some poplars and things like that. And as, of course, our population grew, the demand increased. So in the 1950s, industrial cooperatives, university/industry cooperatives were formed using the expertise in breeding, testing, and things like that at the universities to start basically tree improvement programs and companies. And in the South, of course, that focused on southern yellow pine. There were three cooperatives that were formed in the early 50s, the Western Gulf Cooperative at Texas A&M University, NC State Cooperative, which is the cooperative that's dominant for the state of Tennessee. And then the University of Florida had a cooperative for some more deep South species like sand pines and things like that. Well, the demand was also for a number of other tree species. And of course, in those days, we were thinking more timber than anything else, timber pulp production. And so the universities decided, well, we better get into this, the agricultural experiment stations. So at the land-grant schools, they formed tree improvement programs. And at one time, back in the heydays in the 1970s, there were a number of tree improvement conferences in the East. There were the Lake States Tree Improvement Conference, the Central States Tree Improvement Conference, the Northeastern States Tree Improvement Conference, and the Southern Tree Improvement Conference. And now today, of those, the Southern Tree Improvement Conference is around, and then they've kind of merged all the northern groups together, and I think they either call that the Northern or North Central. I can't remember what they call that now. But after that first round of forest geneticists retired and forest tree breeders retired, money had gotten tighter and tighter. And then, of course, we had the revolution of clonal propagation in plants, and then followed very closely by molecular biology, applications of molecular biology in plants, which also started to include forest trees. So when the land grant, and again, money was tighter, state money was tighter, a lot of the universities and the tree improvement programs were funded through the McIntyre-Stennis program, which is a federal formula funded program where they if a state has X amount of acres in forests, they get X amount of dollars from the feds, but they have to match those in different ways. So it's not just federal money turned over, the state has to kick in too. Unfortunately, the McIntyre-Stennis money stayed relatively stagnant compared to what everything else was going on. And so that hurt tree improvement programs. So as money got tighter and tighter, and I've heard it expressed as there was a lot of administrative fatigue about renewing these very expensive and slow results low, and not exciting results, tree improvement programs. And so in the 80s, all these 70s and 80s, as the original heads of the tree improvement programs retired at land grant schools, they replaced those programs with molecular biologists, clonal propagation specialists, other people that were interested in a little bit more basic science, and the expense and the labor and everything associated with tree improvement programs proved too much, and they basically, most of them went by the wayside. And so we don't have many of those programs left. And the industrial cooperatives are still around. There's 3 in the South. There's one up in the Lake States, and then there's one out on the West Coast. And then you move away from those, and you have really very few tree improvement programs. Now, there's programs that work with forest molecular biology and things like that. They're around, but actual, breeding and testing, field plots, and all of that, there's not too much left of that in the country. The University of Tennessee started their program in '59, and they hired a Norwegian born forester named Ivan Thor. His name actually was Ivan Thor Bjornsson, and when he became an American citizen, he changed it to Thor. And Thor was quite a character. And he headed the program until '82. I came on in '84, and it was my option on whether to continue Professor Thor's materials and tree improvement plantings and things like that, or basically work and do a lot more laboratory oriented work. I've got a mixed training. I'm trained in tree improvement, but it was Great Plains tree improvement through a horticulture department, not anything like southern pine. And I worked with oaks then. And then my PhD is actually in basic research. For the time, I was in cytogenetics, working with tree chromosomes and things like that. And so I'm kind of a hybrid. And I saw what was happening with a lot of the more basic research at the time, and again, late '70s, early '80s, they were using anything like Norway spruce. Well, we use that one that's planted on campus, and that's not a way to really do it. You need to have an integrated program effort with tree improvement and basic research. And that's what I told UT that I would do when I came here. Long story short, $9,000 startup fee and no lab technician, you're not going anywhere in the laboratory. So I would not let the tree improvement program go because that is the future. And so we hung in there and are still going on. For anyone that wishing to read this, there's a publication by Nick Wheeler and Kim Steiner and Dave Neal and myself in the 2015 volume of Journal of Forestry, and it traces kind of the history and the rise and decline and then the integration of molecular biology and all that. So that's how we ended up still in business. Tennessee is a hardwood state. And so, unlike the Southern Pines programs, I decided to emphasize hardwoods. And so now we're dominated with oak species. But also, as civilization, marches on, we're using more and more land for non-forest use. Urban sprawls just been terrible, development and things like that. And so the species that were once maybe common, maybe rare, and in the state of Tennessee, not necessarily rare in the eastern United States, but in the state of Tennessee, those habitats and those species are going away. I've felt for many years that the small stuff like pawpaws and crab apples and things like native species like that and plum are actually going away. And so we not only went with hardwoods, but we also worked with things that have problems. So that's how we ended up. Hardwoods are a lot more difficult to work with than pines. For example, we don't breed hardwoods, or at least oaks. We've bred other hardwoods like yellow poplar, but not oaks. You make a cross with an oak tree, you get 1 or 2 seeds. For you basically cross and pine, you can get like a pine cone with 100 seeds. So it's a lot harder. The hardwood trees are just harder and harder to work with overall. We're moving relatively slow. What I decided, rather than just I looked at Tennessee forests, which are tremendously diverse, and that's why this state is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
We go all the way from the mountains where you have Fraser fir and red spruce up on the top of the mountains and high elevation, kind of higher elevation species, all the way to bottomland hardwoods in West Tennessee. And you just have just a plethora of species to work with. In Tennessee, we've got 35 commercially important hardwood species. Now, some, are one much more important, than others, but that's the challenge. And so what I decided, rather than to work on one species, and I was probably best fit to work on northern red oak or oaks in general, best trained for that, I decided that we needed to take that first step toward domestication with a wide variety of species. And so we have, right now, I think we have seed orchards of about 28 species, hardwood species, and growing. We're constructing them, and we construct them in different ways. And some of those species are quite common, like white oak, northern red oak, things like that. And others are rare. Like we have one of the rarest trees in the world, Harbison's hawthorn, here in Tennessee. Only known from two trees until Barry Hart, NRCS biologist, Mike Hansbrough, another NRCS biologist, found a population in northwestern Tennessee. Still, though, under 200 trees total. That's for the world, And so, we're actually getting involved with them and teaming up with them so we can bring those representatives from that population into a seed orchard situation where we can protect the genetic resources, but also generate seed to reforest more sites with that species so we don't lose them. If you look at the history of civilization, and you look at the history of natural resources as civilization developed, you start out with hunter-gatherer society where you don't really have an impact on the land. You don't have many people, use up locally what you do, and then you just move on to another spot, all the way up to the island of Manhattan. We used to have a lot of wild areas and all that, and now it's skyscrapers, but the demand for the wood products and the other values that come from the forest, including the diversity, are still there. So what this domestication does, it allows us to conserve the genetic resources of the trees and basically have the seed sources so we can put back those trees. And if we use genetic improvement, better, more productive trees on less acreage, because that's the trend of civilization. That's the trend that's happening right here in the United States. More people, less land. You don't have a choice. You have to manage your land either more productively for natural regeneration, or you have to go to domestication. And that's essentially what we're doing here.
You've brought up so many interesting points that I want to ask about. The first thing is that, clearly you, from your experiences, you feel that this idea of natural diversity versus this very isolationist genetic process to try to work with these trees is important. And you're also talking about this idea of domestication. I really want to kind of pull that thread a little bit of what you mean by domestication, because typically when we talk about domestication, most of the time we're talking about food crops, and I'm not getting the impression that's what you mean by this.
Actually, it is.
So
it is.
I don't know if you can.
Yeah,
it is. Okay,
it's just trees are larger, more expensive to work with. They're not an annual crop. They're like humans. They have juvenile maturity in terms of reproduction. They're just harder to work with and way more expensive to work with. But that's really the same ideas behind that. Again, they were domesticated food and fruits and vegetables and things like that because the wild sources just were not meeting the demands of society. And so basically they went through selection, breeding, testing, and now, of course, they're integrating molecular biology and cloning and things like that into those processes. And so we're basically doing that. We're just years and years behind. Our hardwood, I'm talking not, you can have like poplar plantations for fiber and things like that. I'm talking like your mixed hardwood forest in Tennessee.
So when we're talking about this idea of domestication,
Yeah,
around like food crops, and as
right,
you're talking about that, like there's a very long history of humans doing
right,
that. We've done that with
right.
walnuts, apple, all of our fruit trees. When you start talking with oaks, it's a really interesting animal to pick a specific one because of how varied that genetic diversity is, how easily they hybridize. And that's why, like, we actually, with the podcast, one thing we're working on is collecting improved seed from bur oak specifically because low tannin, large nuts. And I think that could be like a really good starting point for trying to identify some of these species. So I guess like when you're talking about like with white oaks through this tree improvement program, how did you select for those trees? Like what is your thought process? Because obviously you're not the work you're doing is about on a timeline much longer than either of our
Right.
lives. So kind of like what does that trajectory look like? What are your thought processes in that?
As I said, the domestication, whether you're dealing with a grain or a fruit, the process is kind of the same, in forest trees. It just takes a lot longer time and it's a lot more expensive for that. What you do, you should do anyway. You should take a look at, well, what is remember, the public pays my salary, so you need to say what does the public want? What can we anticipate that we're going to need more of as the population grows and the land base shrinks? And so you make some decisions along those lines. Now, the UT program is a little different in that we're holistic in that we recognize that something like post oak has absolutely no value or very little value as a timber species, but it inhabits a really dry site. It produces mast that wildlife will eat. So we actually work with post oak and then some species like that. So we make a decision like that. Always you have to figure that you have finances in back of it. So you can't do everything for all purposes. So you do have to
Mm,
make some choices there. For example, sassafras. Sassafras now has a non-native pest disease that catches this laurel wilt that has devastated red bay down in the coastal Florida and the coastal states and things. And it gets off. Actually gets off on a wide range of things, but sassafras is one. We got it here in Tennessee. I should be basically conserving the genetic resources of sassafras, but I don't have the resources to do that. And it's probably will be a more difficult species to do that with. We don't know anything really about sassafras, which I will say I've been working with oaks for almost 50 years now, and I don't feel that we know very much about oaks. You move away from northern red oak, which we probably know the most about, maybe white cherry bark, which is a bottomland species, second, then maybe a white oak, and then you move away from those trees. We don't know very much about these species at all.
mm,
We don't know much about the genetic diversity. We don't. I mean, there's information out there, but it's just scratching the surface, and much less to read. Basically take that first step of domestication, plant that seed, and then develop a seedling that can be planted and live out in the forest without spending $1 million per seedling. White oak's very challenging, to produce something out of the nursery that a landowner can plant and walk away. We're not there yet, and that's going to take a lot of time, but I make those choices in consideration of the products that come out of these tree species. I do not advocate, for example, planting pure white oak stands, because you're going to run into disease and insect problems right away. We have some of those in our seed orchards that you don't find out in the wild. When you go to a pure species kind of a type planting. Now, you might say, well, what about all these pine plantations? Well, pine plantations were developed when the U.S. Forest Service had a tremendous infrastructure of disease and cone and seed insect people and disease people behind all of that dealt with a lot of those problems. When you put loblolly pine or another pine species into a pure stand, that infrastructure is almost gone now in this country, and they never did work that much with hardwoods. If you do that, you're really taking a chance. But I will say in this state, people don't want to see that. People want to see, in general, their mixed hardwood forests. And so that's what we were in, where they extract so many values out of it, aesthetic values, timber values, wildlife values for wildlife, just for let's go out camping, or let's shoot that turkey. We try to manage the tree improvement program to meet a wide variety of those values. And we take a look at what's going on with some of these species, like hemlock woolly adelgids, ruining our hemlock and killing our hemlocks back here. So we're conserving that. We're not breeding for resistance or anything. We're just conserving the genetic resources. Something like Harbison's hawthorn. And then strangely enough, and this is strange for me because I'm from Nebraska, where we had wild plums just lining the roadside, our plum populations, I think, are going away, particularly in West Tennessee. Jim Byford, who's a prominent wildlife biologist, and he was dean of the University of Tennessee Martin campus ag school. Jim told me that about 25 years ago, said that I asked him about wild plum, and he says, well, we don't have hardly any of that out here. And it's true. We're surveying now, and we're actually cloning them through rooted cuttings to develop wild plum orchards. And it turns out Tennessee's got like 6 species. Some of they're going away. Another example, and I really didn't know this, is we're into crab apples now. Southern crabapple and sweet crabapple, 2 different species, are in Tennessee, but they're going away too, I think. So we're bringing those in. Swamp white oak is another example. Good wildlife tree, probably can get some timber out of it, but good wildlife tree. It grows in a wetter habitat, and the main part of the range is more north and west. We just have, if you look at those distribution maps where you have the little dots instead of the whole range, we just have those kind of dots and things. We've been surveying for that for years. I know we don't have over even 30 different locations in the state of Tennessee for swamp white oak.
Oh, wow.
So that species, I think some of that was cut too, because there never was much of it. And some of it's cut. It's just like in a lot of these plant species, nobody targeted them, but they lived in a certain habitat, and that habitat got used for something else by society. Or swamp white oak, I think they cut them. They live by water. Well, there are early settlers that came in, the European settlers. They lived by water. You got to have water, and so I think they cut them. So, but I don't think there was very many at all. Anyway, well,
yeah, it's really interesting to think about how you've got a myriad of factors. The expansion of urban and suburban spaces, landscape management, the removal of like indigenous land management practices like fire, and then the elephant in the room right now, I think, for anyone in this space, is both invasives and climate change kind of doing their thing and really kind of amping up the pressure on these native species.
Short-term invasive species much more devastating than climate change. Climate change will move things around. Some of these things, like swamp white oak with the little dots on the map, they may go away, those populations. But invasives, these non-native pests, are just awful. I teamed up in the early 90s with Faith Campbell. Faith is probably the nation's expert on policy for non-native pests. And we, if you look on the UT website, there's on non-native pests, there's a section on that we developed over a 25-year period of time, 3 reports called Fading Forests. Read those. And of course, the last one we put out was in 2015. They're fairly lengthy reports. an integration of policy and biology. And you read those, and our forests and I tell students this, are being transformed before our eyes. These non-native pests are going to, our forest in 50 years is going to be very different from them. And then you compile that with the, slower effects of climate change on that. We still, there's debate on, what's it going to do? Is it going to make it hotter? Is it going to make it wetter? All of that. And we still don't really know on that, certainly not down to the species level, not with biology data and biological data. And so, but that's coming, and it's just gonna make things. So we've got the non-native pests, we've got the climate change, and then we have our society, which is more and more and more people wanting more and more values out of what's left of the forested land.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up the invasive insects pathogens, because people, when you start talking about invasives, they'll say, like, here in New England where I live, autumn olive, like at least birds eat the fruit or whatever, or Japanese knotweed, like it'll eventually get shaded out by a forest or whatever. And like, okay, those might be true, but those aren't even really the big problems. You look at the canopy species of an old growth forest, and here in New England, almost every single one of them has a major invasive issue that is killing them, whether it's beech, obviously American chestnut. You start going through the list, and it's like a majority of the keystone species for our forests are under major attack. It's not, Japanese knotweed has its problems, but like that's not really the issue here.
What I tell our students is my generation, the generation of Earth Day, Green Revolution, all that stuff, we failed. We have. I mean, there was warning, but we let this go on. It's still going. You don't think so? Look for a champion in Congress on this. It's getting worse and worse. Trade doesn't help because we're getting a lot of these, certainly the insects, and we can get even pathogens, in solid wood packing material. We've warned, if you read Fading Forests series, and before that, Faith Campbell has warned and warned and warned against that. We could solve that right away. You basically you can make a composite pallet or packing case probably stronger than solid wood, and nothing can survive that processing of the wood. And we just aren't doing that.
Hey, we're taking a quick break in the episode to remind you that you can get a whole lot more information from poorproles.com. On our website, we have access to our supplemental reader for the podcast, which provides more depth and context, as well as thorough citations for all of the stuff we talk about in the show. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which updates you about limited releases, such as various nursery stock that we sometimes sell through the Poor Proles website, as well as updates about new merch that we have. You can also support the show through that website, poorproles.com, where you have access to our Patreon and our Substack to get early releases for articles and episodes. Now, if you enjoy the show and are just looking for even more audio content, go check out Tomorrow Today, which just wrapped up season 1, or tune into the Gastropocene, which is a project of myself and Dr. Aisha Khan to discuss the way our diets have driven the Anthropocene and what it looks like to use our diets for good. Now, back to the show. With the work you've been doing, you've been in this field for a long time. To kind of go the opposite end, what is the species that you're most hopeful for? Like, what is it from all of this research that you're like, yeah, we have these problems, we're not addressing them, we don't have the right funding, but here are these like really things that are giving me hope for future generations in this area? I hope there's something. Please tell me there's something.
I think the work that we're going to do with harvested hawthorn is going to certainly, keep it in the forest and the plums and the swamp white oak here in Tennessee, and the crabapple, 2 crabapple species that are native to Tennessee. I mean, we're gonna do that, and you can do that with just anything. It's just a matter of resources. And I'd like to emphasize too. Well, I talk UT Tree Improvement Program. We have basically collectively, I refer to all the seed orchards across the state as the Tennessee seed orchard system. But that we just administer that. That depends on many cooperators. In the next year or so, we'll be on all 10 of our University of Tennessee's ag research stations across the state. We have 3 seed orchard hubs. One's on the Ames Ag Research Station out in West Tennessee. The Middle Tennessee hub is on Jack Daniel Distillery land. And we've been working with them for 25 years. And of course, they were initially interested in sugar maple because they filter their raw whiskey through sugar maple charcoal, which makes it a Tennessee whiskey. But they've been very generous, and now we have 65 acres of seed orchards of a variety of species down there, including butternut, which is a federal species of concern and on the state list of threatened and endangered. So they've been, and the deal we provide the technical expertise. They give us a little bit of money, for a couple of our travel expenses, and then they maintain this and provide the land. So we got, that's a good example of a public-private, partnership that has lasted again, for 25 years and will last, I'm convinced, for many more years. And then in the East Tennessee, we have the Tennessee River Valley Authority that basically they had a hardwood tree improvement program, the premier one in the country. They suspended in '82. But we've got all their old records and plantings, and we work with some of those still. And then they've infused new money where we're developing new orchards for East Tennessee on TVA land. For people that would want to go to our website, I assume you're going to give the address out.
Yep.
If you go to our video channel, you can see what we're doing with swamp white oak, which is really interesting. We're working with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And we basically planted a seed orchard on their land on a wildlife management area that they don't want a normal seed orchard management, which is basically a scorched earth policy under the trees so we can pick up the acorns easy. They basically want to continue to have that as a wildlife management area. So we can live with that. It's just at certain times makes things a little more difficult, but we've got a system where now that land is being used for dual purpose, for the wildlife management area, and then also for production of seed that goes to all of our seed goes to the Tennessee Department of Agriculture's East Tennessee State Nursery. We're set up for that. So Professor Shore started cooperating with the Division of Forestry here in '66, and we've continued that as well. And of course, we can cooperate with TWRA, NRCS. We really, have cooperated with, the federal and the state agencies. So while we administer and set direction generally for this Tennessee seed orchard system, it's really a cooperative effort, right down to the people that are assigned to mow those orchards and maintain those orchards. We can't live without those people.
Yeah,
it's a huge cooperative effort.
You brought up the TVA, which I know is really polarizing, depending on who you talk to in Tennessee. Yeah, but that despite all of the challenges people have with it, one of the most important things, in my opinion, is the work that they've done in the reforestry space. And I know we email back and forth about kind of how that evolved a bit, and from the John Hershey era to kind of the second wave of the TVA forestry project. I don't know if you could speak a little bit about what those genetics were and why they were important for that the ones that you guys started working from.
Yeah, well, TVA had two primary tree kind of programs. One was started back in the 30s and lasted into the 40s, which they called the tree crops program. And that was really a horticultural program with tree species. And what they wanted to do was to provide a cash crop to Tennessee River Valley residents, which of course many were very poor, and they wanted to put cash into their hands, quickly. So they basically gathered together black walnut cultivars for nut productions, all kinds of things like that. And then even went overseas and got Chinese dates, which is called juju.
Jujubes?
Have you ever eaten one?
I have not
Well,
actually.
I don't know. To me, they taste like cardboard, but I haven't had one that's been preserved like a date. But they even have pulled in some of those trees, and then an interesting tree that they also pulled in, and they have just one example was Mandarin melonberry, also from.
Oh, I've seen that. Someone posted about that before.
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's a good tasting fruit. So it's about the size of a raspberry, but it has it's sweet, but not overly sweet, and has a melon aftertaste. So they had those programs, and then TBA set up. People don't understand this, but TBA set up to take that initial step and then spin it off. And so, they after a few years, a couple of 20 years or so, they basically moved on from the tree crops program. So then the next big wave, of course, the TBA was very cognizant of what was going on with the Southern Yellow Pine tree industrial cooperatives, and then all the tree improvement programs popping up. And they had the foresight to basically take that step into pines, but also, strangely enough, into hardwoods in a pretty big way. And they selected trees, grafted them, brought those into common locations. They tested, they put out the first test of white oak, and the second major round of testing of northern red oak, and then the only testing of chestnut. And so they were working with species like that. But again, the steam kind of went out of that in the 70s. And by 82, TBA had decided to suspend those programs. But they worked closely with the state of Tennessee when the state of Tennessee had a tree improvement program, and with us as well. So that continues on. The nation's largest oak orchard, it's northern red oak, is an old TBA genetic test that's up in northeastern Tennessee on the northern end of the Cherokee National Forest, and we manage that for the Cherokee National for the southern region is what we do, and work hand in hand with the Forest Service on that. So it's 16 acres in size, and the yields of acorns now are in tons. I started working at that orchard in 1990. Although I visited it before then, and in 85, and then we took over the management in the late 90s of it. So long time. And I have to say this, the Forest Service seed orchard manager was a gentleman named Ken Profit. He retired from the Forest Service in 2005. And so we hired him back as a contractor. So Ken's 77, he's the seed orchard manager, the operational manager, and he's up there right now today picking up acorns for reforestation.
That name sounds so familiar. I'm trying to figure out why. I'm not sure if maybe he also is in like the NNGA or something. His name's very familiar.
Yeah, he and I've worked together now for 33 years, so that's kind of nice. That's a perk.
Yeah, I mean, having that resource is amazing. You're talking about like this genetic diversity. What exactly are you hoping to get out of it for future? You're harvesting these tons of acorns. Like, what is the goal of
Well,
those?
we take them to the nurse. We harvest them. We keep them separate by pedigree, and we create a blend of a genetically diverse blend, and then they're growing for the state of Tennessee, but they're also growing for the U.S. Forest Service for reforestation. So oaks, what we have found is that oaks, they produce different levels of acorns. Some just rain acorns down, and then some don't. And what we find with oaks is that some produce a lot of acorns and some don't. And so if you, in this 16-acre seed orchard that we call the Watauga seed orchard, is I could meet Forest Service demand for the entire region with 10 trees. 10 trees is not enough diversity. So basically, we do blends of seed to ensure the genetic diversity of them. So that's and we're still learning about how to manage that orchard and meet different challenges that comes along the way, including disease challenges.
So some of the goal is to try to level out some of that mass production, or to at least try to winnow the selection of red oaks to more high producing nut acorns or trees.
Well, no, you don't want to do that because, like I said, if I wanted to do that, I'd cut down everything except for 10 trees and we'd meet the demand, and that's too low genetic diversity. In your tree improvement programs, we're very cognizant of genetic diversity. We don't want something that's really, really narrow. We try to put, we want a tree that'll perform, but we try to ensure that it has a broad enough genetic background to withstand pest, climate, climate, I won't say climate change, but climate fluctuations. And because it has to live for a long time, particularly if you're looking at oaks, you've got to live for probably 60 years before you get to start harvesting for timber, 50, 60 years or so. So you need that broad genetic diversity that's still in them. And the reason I blend acorns from the Watauga orchard is that if I just use 10, or if I just combine the low producers in with the big producers, they get swamped. And so we ensure that the Forest Service receives a nice blend of seed. But we're just learning this stuff. I mean, that's like I say, that's the largest, I don't know if it's the oldest, but it's very close if it's not, seed orchard in the oak seed orchard in the United States. And we're learning tons about it. The TVA program, even though they're suspended in '82, they still, their materials that we still use their materials in different ways. And so it still carries on, even though TVA, doesn't operate a tree improvement program. But then 2015, they started making resources available to us to start new plantings, including a genetic test of the trees that came from the Watauga orchard, so kind of a second generation planting. And so we're doing that, so TVA, we're working hand in hand with them on things.
Awesome. Now, I want to ask about the Jack Daniel's distillery project too. You brought up that you're working with butternuts there. I know you're also working with black walnuts and bald cypress. So I'm really interested why those trees were chosen, given that, like you said, their bigger concern was that sugar maple.
Okay, yeah. Well, this started back in '98. The distillery contacted us and they said, we think we might have a problem with our sugar maple supply. And I'll say this about Jack Daniel's Distillery: they are very, very, and of course they're owned by Brown Forman company out of Louisville. They are very, very environmentally conscious company, and and of course they're good business people too. So if they have a product that's critical to their production of whiskey, say sugar maple, or another product, let's say water, the story that the water comes out of this cave, that's true. I mean, they will map their water, they do all kinds of things with water. Anything threatens those, they don't wait until they have a problem. They do something before. So they at the time they weren't harvesting sugar maple, they were buying sugar maple and making their own sugar maple charcoal to mellow the whiskey. And they thought, well, we might have kind of a local problem. So we looked at the inventory, one of our professors, John Rennie, and he said, you may or may not have a problem. We told him that. And they said, well, we want to do something anyway. And I said, well, we don't have a sugar maple orchard in the state of Tennessee. TVA did some work on it back in the 50s, and that's been it. And so we basically said, okay, we've got this piece of land. Well, they had a big piece of land, and it's 27 acres, I think it is. And I looked at it, I said, well, we don't need all of this in sugar maple. I tell you what, you guys use white oak as barrels, and for barrels, and right away the general manager, his name was Tommy Bean. He said, and Doug Clark was another manager that was out there too. And he said, right, well, that's not us. That's a cooperage. We don't do that. I said, yeah, but white oak's a good tree. And I said, and you got a lot. Central Tennessee is walnut country, black walnut, butternut traditionally, a long, long time ago. And I said, black walnut's a good tree too. So from that start, all those would fit in that 127-acre property. And they said, okay. And so from that start, and I will say this is a handshake deal, still is. Well, I told them, I said, you understand, if you commit to this, you're not committing for the next 5 years. You're going to give me a little money up front, but I'm going to use that money, and it'll be gone. You're committing for decades here. I just want you need to understand that. And they said, yeah, that's okay. We'll do it. So we shook hands, and we've gone on from there. And the distillery, they have, warehouses and land where they can't use it for anything else. Have allowed us to expand the orchard system, and now we've got 10 or 11 species and counting. We're adding some too. We're still adding to all of that, fitting them into the land, and we ended up with 65 acres of seed orchards, including butternut.
Oh wow, it's awesome.
And now, when we started this, we didn't know anything about sugar beet. And so the Vermont foresters told us, well, grows real slow. It'll be 25 years to reproductive maturation. Okay. And so we planted it, and our stuff grew great. So I thought we'd have seed production 10, 12, 15 years. And no, this year, 25 years to date, was the first year that we had widespread production in the orchard. So you have 25 years of investment there for land, maintenance, put a fence around it, things like that, you have to be willing to make that investment before you get fruition. With the white oak orchard, we're taking now crops to the East Tennessee State Nursery. The first, we had production, but the first big production year where I felt, well, this is commercial scale, was in 2021, which was 20 years after we planted the orchard.
Yeah, and now those black walnuts and butternuts, I know you said the butternuts were critically endangered. Are you doing any specific work with the genetics, or was it just bulk buy black walnuts thrown in?
Yeah, we can. The black walnuts are producing. That's a small. I call it. It's an orchard, but we've got the genetics on, but it's really a seed production orchard, and so that, and then the butternut's much younger. It'll be years before it produces, but we can't. There's another thing. We put a lot of effort into butternut, I'll say 20 years ago, for about 10 to 15 years. But I basically decided the cost of breeding and real intensive work with any tree species, whether it had a pest problem or not, was so extensive that I would have to sacrifice broadening the effort to different species, taking that first step to domestication. And so I decided to go the latter route. I thought, in retrospect, if I can conserve the genetic resources on things that have problems like butternut, if we can get seed orchards and genetic improvement started in some of the other species, then that's probably a better contribution to the state of Tennessee than concentrating on just one species. And of course, here again, you take the risk when you do something that's going to extend beyond your career, that you may or may not be wasting your time. I saw the other tree improvement programs fail and nothing come out of them. In the 1990s, I decided I was going to take a rapid approach to, at the very least, we might not have, in my career, genetic improvement, but we're going to have the seed orchards there. And I took a different approach too. We basically call Tennessee the three states of Tennessee. We have three major physiographic, different regions in Tennessee. And so our program is constructed with local genotypes from each one of those three states of Tennessee. So the hub at Ames Ag Research and Education Center, those are West Tennessee genotypes. Jack Daniels, Middle Tennessee genotype. East Tennessee TVA, those are Eastern Tennessee genotypes. So eventually our state nursery will end up with seed that from each three of those regions. Now, I'm having trouble with genetic diversity in swamp white oak. our one orchard, our orchard in East Tennessee bore 2 years ago, and we had some albino seedlings and things like that. And that's a sign that you've got inbreeding depression. You don't have enough diversity there. And so unless we can find some more, and I've got a grad student that's working on that right now, Jesse Parker, who's working with Laura Thompson, who's USGS scientist, and they're trying to develop a predictive model. We actually did this 20 some years ago with butternut to locate more of the diversity, but I may have just an all Tennessee orchard of swamp white oak. And I'm thinking maybe also of southern crabapple and sweet crabapple as well. So that's evolving. So,
Yeah, so you got your hands in a lot of different pots with the hope that at least some of them will continue on. They might not all.
well,
but...
we'll see. I mean, it's going to be, up to UT administration and of course the state to see, is this effort worthwhile and all of that. I think the answer, of course, is yes. And the next person will not have to take that first step to domestication, which it's not career friendly, I will tell you that. And it's very hard, it's very expensive, and you're not going to see the fruitions of your labor. But if you're in forestry, you better accept that from day one.
Doesn't mean the work isn't important. Someone needs to do it. Someone has to take those first steps, and that's your role.
Yeah.
And that's important. Scott, so for folks that are listening, I know you guys have an Instagram page plus the UTennessee website.
And Facebook.
Instagram, I think, is, and Facebook. I know it's UT Tip on Instagram, so it's UTTIP.
Well, if you just enter UT Tree Improvement Program, you should see all that pop up on a Google search. The Facebook and Instagram are basically what we're doing right now. I mean, what we're doing, kind of a current events update, and then the website is more, I guess I'd call it stable. We don't make frequent changes to that. We are adding one change in that American Forest has, which is the American Forestry Association, which is the oldest forestry association in the nation, formed back in the late 1800s. They have put up some money for us to start with the Tennessee Division of Forestry, for us to start a wild forest seed collection network, where we go out and locate native trees, collect those seed, and that seed goes to the state nursery. So we've got locally adapted stuff going to the state nursery, and as a stopgap to until the seed orchards start to bear enough to meet demand. So we've got that project going on. A very fine young woman, Erin Victorson, is heading up that project for us, and she's going to be out collecting acorns this week.
Nice. So for folks that are listening, can they contribute seed? If they live in Tennessee, is there anything they can do to get involved?
Yeah, if we have a list of species, and we just put a new blurb on the website on this, but we haven't flushed it out yet because we're waiting for, this is the first year, and we're waiting for get some good photos of Erin, collecting seed and all of that. We're kind of feeling our way through that. And certainly, if they go to the Facebook site and indicate interest, in participating, we're looking for native trees, generally large trees, and then permission for us or one of the state agencies to collect seed underneath that trees to take to the East Tennessee State Nursery for growing.
Awesome.
And again, this program's stopgap program till the orchards come in, which maybe, we're looking at 20 some years, probably for the newer ones that we're putting together. So, these things hopefully will be around for a long time. If we get things right in our nursery, we're not having to buy seed from, anywhere. We get basically Tennessee seed that's locally adapted, and then as it comes from some of our orchards, it'll be genetically improved.
That's awesome. Scott, this has been really interesting. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how this evolves over the next decades. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. This has been great.
You bet. Thanks, Andy.